So, welcome back to part 4 of the Penny Family History slideshow. Once again, I'm Dave Penny. In the previous episode, we looked at the two older brothers of Alan, who's my grandfather, who visited Canada. Those two brothers, they visited Canada in just before World War I broke out. Jim took 2 visits and Jack took 1 visit. And they returned back home to England in large part to join up for the war effort. So in this episode, we'll look at the wartime years, about what happened during the war, and then right up to just past the end of the war, just before the family immigrates to Canada. So once again, go grab your drink. I have my single malt scotch. Let's have a toast. Toast to the pennies, to the Penny Family History slideshow and its successful execution. Cheers. Let's get going. So we'll start with just a little bit of history of World War I for those who don't know it so well. So World War I was between 1914 and 1918. This here is a timeline of the first year of the war, how things got started. Really, it was a battle between Germany allied with the Austro-Hungarian Empire against Russia, France, and Britain. That was called the Triple Entente. These three were worried about the imperialism inside of Germany in particular. And Germany, for its part, was worried that these 3 countries had bigger economies, were outspending, were out producing arms, were out producing across the board, and Germany would inevitably get shrunken and shrunken. And Germany was thought it existential that they fight a war when they still had a chance of beating or at least weakening their perceived rivals. The natural allies of Germany were the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They shared a common language. They all spoke German across this whole area. There was the precursor to World War I was the so-called Balkan Wars, which was the Ottoman Empire versus essentially the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where the Ottoman Empire had all of this stuff up here, and they fought a war in the Balkans just before this, 5 years before. And in that war, the Austro-Hungarian Empire got Bosnia, which is over here, and Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia. Serbia attained its independence from the Ottoman Empire. But Serbia was kind of a bit of a puppet state of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. While officially they were independent, they had leaders that were kind of imposed by the much stronger Austro-Hungarian Empire, and their trade was dominated by Austro-Hungary. And the Serbs were very nationalistic as well, and some Serbs resented that. Some favored it, of course. The Serbs and the Russians were allied as well, so there was a Russian-Serbian alliance going on. A Serbian separatist, kind of Serbian nationalist, murdered the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire and his wife, Sophie, when they were visiting Bosnia. And that kind of set in motion World War I. Things started falling like dominoes after that, but that was just a bit of an excuse. Germany was itching to go to war, and that was just the excuse. So the Austro-Hungarians were outraged by this, and they started trying to impose themselves more on Serbia, and Serbia started fighting back against that. Germany was encouraging the Austro-Hungarian Empire to go to war and take Serbia. Germany knew that Serbia and Russia had an alliance, and that would likely bring Russia into the war. So Germany promised the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the so-called blank check assurance that whatever happened as a result of them going into Serbia, Germany would support them, even if it meant going to war with Russia. So that's what happened. Basically, the Austro-Hungarian Empire declares war on Serbia, and then Russia mobilizes in support of Serbia, and then Germany and France both mobilize. Germany declares war on Russia as a result of that. And then Germany, and there's a triple entente between Russia, Britain, and Paris, and Germany invades Belgium, neutral Belgium, and they declare war on France. And then as a result of that détente, Britain declares war on Germany on August 4th. So that's what, these are the so-called Axis powers, Germany, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. And these are the so-called Allied powers, the Russia, Britain, France. Later on in the war, the US come into it, but only much later after that. And so all through 1914, that's kind of the picture. Here's the bigger sweep of World War I. As we say, in August 4th, England enters the war right around here. There was a big period of trench warfare. There's a Western Front and an Eastern Front. The Western Front is around Belgium, and the Eastern Front is over near Russia. The trench warfare goes on really throughout, and eventually U.S. Joins in 1918, and that really ends the war because there's this. The U.S. has an absolute might in terms of their industrial capacity to produce arms and to supply troops. Now, of course, Canada was in it from the beginning, being a part of the British Empire, but the U.S. came in relatively late. And then the war ended on November 11th, 1918, called Armistice Day. So Jack and Jim and Alec were all in the war in France. They joined up right around here, and they saw their first action right around here. And I'll go over that in some more detail. Jim was wounded in one of these early battles in the eye, and he was discharged from the army as a result of that. Jack perished in one of the second major battles in 1915 over here. Alec was injured with a head wound, but not so badly that he couldn't return to active duty. So he went back to active duty, and he survived right to the end of the war. These are some of the major battles that were fought by the Gordon Highlanders. So they saw a lot of action, and Alex would have seen all of these, or at least a good subset of them anyways. They didn't sign up. They weren't there until the first battle was the Battle of Neuve, Chapelle, which I'll go over in more detail in March. So they didn't arrive overseas until just before that battle. And Jim might have been injured either in this one or in the Battle of Loos. We're not exactly sure. But Jack lost his life in October 12th at the Battle of Loos. And as I say, Alec was injured but returned and saw this out. I'm not sure if he was part of the Battle of the Somme, which was one of the most deadly battles that there was. It was a catastrophic war in terms of deaths and casualties. Here's some figures. The British Empire, that's the entire empire, had about 80 million population. About 8 or 9 million were mobilized. And of the number mobilized, the total casualties, that is, killed and died or wounded or missing, was about almost 40% of the number mobilized. So your odds weren't great, and almost 1 million died out of the 9 million that were mobilized for that war. So it was a dreadful war, although the French did terribly, and the Russians did terribly, and of course the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans did not fare very well either. So Jim and Jack are back in Scotland in time to join up, and which they do with their younger brother Alec, who was 19 at the time, around 1914. And they join the Gordon Highlanders, which is the unit of the British Army which was local to Aberdeen. The 6th Gordon Highlanders were local to Aberdeen in particular. And their dad, Jock, was associated with the Gordon Highlanders. He was in the militia prior to the Boer War, and during the Boer War, he trained troops, becoming sergeant major in the process of doing that. And that's a picture of Jock in 1918, just after the war. Jock rejoined the army, but he was too old for active service, so they put him on the Home Guard. And at one point, he was guarding the arsenal at Woolwich, which I've already talked about, and was injured when a Zeppelin dropped a bomb, and he got some wood splinters in his leg. It was quite a serious injury. Now, the Gordon Highlanders were quite well known as a very frightful regiment. So this was a piece of propaganda that was generated during the war, which was as a result of Britain intercepting some documents from Germany. And if I'll just read it to you, it says, it talks about the 51st Gordon Highlanders, which is the Gordon Highlander Division, frightful to the Huns. The following tribute to the magnificent gallantry of the 51st Highland Division has been paid by the German Higher Command, who has awarded the pride of place on its frightful list to the Ladies from Hell, and is here reprinted by kind permission from the Pall Mall Gazette. Ladies from Hell because they wore kilts into battle. The War Office has, I hear, just come into possession of a document of extraordinary interest. Some day a thrilling story may be told of how and where it was secured. The document is one recently prepared by the German headquarters staff and placed in the hands of the divisional commanders in the field for their guidance. It is a list of British divisions in the order of their Furchtbarkeit, which may be translated much to be fearedness. Furchtbarkeit is frightfulness, but not Schrecklichkeit, the frightfulness as practiced in Belgium and elsewhere. And by that, they mean that the frightfulness as in terrifying, as in stabbing babies with bayonets. And they distinguish that from frightful as in being fearless and people being afraid of them. In this historic list, pride of place is given to the following. Number 1, the 51st Division. That's the Gordon Highlanders. And then a couple of other units mentioned after that as well. So it had a great reputation as a terrific fighting force. So here's it's kind of a postcard. This is in the family's possession. I think there was kind of a day when the family could go and visit the training camp. This was a training camp called Maisley Camp, which was in Aberdeenshire near Keith. And the recruits slept in tents, and they were trained in how to use their weapons and formations and this, that, and the other. So these sort of postcards were pictures taken at the time that I think were sent home with the parents. So Jack, Jim, and Alec were all here. For all I know, Jock was part of that training, but I don't know for sure. And here's another photo where you see the families visiting. At this point, there's still a sense of optimism about the war. They hadn't really gotten into the thick of it yet, and there was a lot of patriotic fervor at this point. So here's a photo of the time, and you can see Alec on it with the penny ears, and you can see Jim there as well. So this is a photo I think we've seen before on the left, maybe not the one on the right, But the one on the left, this is Jack here and Jim here in their uniforms. And they've also got Annie here. Annie worked as a factory worker in Inverurie, I think, during this time, I guess helping out the war effort or some way. And over here, this is Alec over here, just with a couple of his buddies in the Gordon Highlanders. And this is also a photo we've seen before that I've also zoomed in for you. But that's Jack, and that's Alec, and that's Jock. And obviously Jack is in his uniform, and this is before being sent overseas, so sometime 1914, 1915. And for some reason, Alec isn't in his uniform. He looks like he might be a spy or something, but he wasn't really. Now, here's a letter from Jack before being deployed to the front in 1915, addressed to Mrs. Penny at 30A High Street in Inverurie. Private J.C. Penny, that's Jack, number 11279, E Company, 6th Battalion of the Gordon Highlanders. And he's writing from Bedford. And Bedford is in England, a little bit north of London, and that's where they went after training to stage for going to France. Dear Mother, just a few lines to let you know I'm going off to the front in a day or two. I'm getting on fine, have been living in tents for the last 2 weeks, about 2 miles out of Bedford. I suppose it is to harden us to it, but it is very nice all the same. Well, Mother, I hope you are all well and in good health, as this leaves me the same. I am your son, Jack. P.S. Tell Father and all the rest that I was asking for them. I like that they thought they were going to tough him up by putting them in tents, but didn't seem to faze Jack at all, who had suffered some back in Canada working on those farms, so I don't think he minded at all. And here's a photo of Jack, the 3rd of the 6th Gordons B Company, prior to leaving to the front, and that's Jack down there with the rifle. And similarly, Alec was going off as well, and there's a photo of Alec with his company. So the first action they see in France is right around here. You can see this is Belgium, and the Germans over here had marched into Belgium, and then they had gone past it and actually gotten all the way almost to Paris when the French pushed them back, and the lines formed up around here. And then they dug into this trench warfare. So this was the Battle of Neuve Chapelle between the 10th and the 13th of March, 1915. So it was the first major action of the year in which the Gordons were involved. It was an attempt by the Allies to break the stalemate that had formed in the trenches in 1914. The 2nd Gordon Highlanders were involved from the first day, and they suffered very high casualties. And the 6th Gordons came up in support from March 11th. So as I said, this was the first major engagement for the 6th Battalion, who'd been in France since November of 1914. So although initially hugely successful, the Battle of Neuve Chapelle descended into failure as a result of the collapse of communications, which seriously hampered the British effort to advance further. Although they were taken by surprise at first, the German army responded with force and rushed many more soldiers into the trenches, launching a counterattack on the 12th of March. The British troops also rushed many more soldiers into their trenches and managed to hold the 2 kilometers of ground they gained the day before. Further progress proved impossible, and the attack was stopped on the 13th of March. So that was an account of the Battle of Neuve Chapelle. So here's a colorized photo of the Gordon Highlanders washing up in Neuve, Chapelle, right at the time of that battle. This is what Neuve Chapelle looked like after the battle. It was fairly dreadful. So, reading a contemporary account, it says, on March 13th, the third and final day of the Battle of Neuve Chapelle, British troops repelled a German attack and launched another of their own. They were forced to call a halt after less than 2 hours, however, as many units had been decimated. By the time the attacks were called off later that day, Allied forces had captured a small salient 2,000 yards wide and 1,200 yards deep, along with 1,200 German prisoners, at the cost of 7,000 British and 4,200 Indian casualties. And so here's a contemporary report. March 13th, 1915. About 3 a.m., orders were received that the battalion would relieve the Yorks in the front line of trenches, and that at 9:30 a.m., after an artillery bombardment, we should charge the German trenches and the houses near Moulin du Piètre on the road near 3 and M30. The battalion moved up and took over the trenches just before daylight. The trenches were very low and afforded very little cover. They also had a good number of dead and wounded in them. Lieutenant Colonel H.P. Vinicki suddenly arrived up with us, although he had gone sick the previous night. He crawled along behind the trench up towards the right of our line and started looking over the trench every few seconds and exposing himself very much while arranging the charge. He was killed outright, a very great loss to us. At about 9:10 a.m., during the bombardment, some of our shells began falling very close to A Company. On the right, one going into the trench and killing one man. This was not encouraging for a charge, and as the enemy's rifle fire was very heavy, Major Stansfeld decided not to advance, but that he would go in to explain matters to the brigade. On our left, the 6th Battalion, Gordon Highlanders, that was Jack and Jim's regiment, were being brought up in support, and some of them getting to our trench, and acting CSM Monroe gathered a few of our men and joined up with the men of the 6th Battalion, went forward to an unoccupied line of trench about 50 yards in front, where they remained all day. Major Stansfeld, though himself wounded, was indefatigable in moving up and down the line, only possible on hands and knees, organizing the attack, until he saw that it was out of the question. That left Major J.M. Hamilton in command. The battalion remained there all that day, losing Captain Hay and 2nd Lieutenant Mitchell wounded, and a certain amount of other casualties from shell fire. In the evening, we were told that we would be relieved during the night, and so the quartermaster, Captain Mackey, who came up to our trenches, did not bring rations, but had them ready in billets at Lavantie. So this dire picture is all that was left of a battalion of, and which a battalion is usually 1,000 men and 250 officers, of the 2nd Gordon Highlanders after the Battle of Neuve Chapelle. Only about 180 men left. As I say, the 2nd suffered very heavy casualties, and had Jack, Jim, and Alec been in the 2nd, they likely obviously would have died. So the next major battle they faced was the Battle of Festubert, 15 to 25th May, 1915. Again, this isn't a family photo, but a contemporary photo of the Battle of Festubert, showing soldiers in the trenches. Now here's a letter from Jack from the French front in 1915. I'll read it for you. It's on Friday. Now, they had censors, so they weren't allowed to write where they were or the date or anything like that. So they could only put certain prescribed information, or the censors would pick it up and delete it. So we could say that it was on Friday. 11279 J.C. Penny, that's Jack, the 16th of the 6th Battalion, Gordon Highlanders. Dear Mother and Father, just a few lines to let you know how I am always getting along. I am just newly out of hospital after being in for 10 days with a sprained ankle, so I am all right again. Well, mother, how is Jim always getting on? You can tell him I received his letter all right, but I had not time to answer it as we were going in to support an attack, so I gave it to Alec, so I don't know if he answered it or not. He is still on the transport and liking it fine. Well, mother, tell father if he is still working in the stores to send on a Glengarry cap for me, as my one is all torn and tattered, and I can't get another one here. And I would like if you would send me a parcel yourself, a big bumper this time. S'il vous plaît, French, if you please. I had a letter from Canada about a month ago, and they are getting on all right and wishing I was back with them again. You never told me you had written them and gave my address. Well, I think I will stop now and get my dinner, bully beef and hard biscuits. Hoping you're all well at present, as this leaves me the same. I am Jack. Right soon. So that was a letter from Jack. He talks about, it was a fairly large, large group of men, and they're in separate companies, so he didn't necessarily see Jim all the time. He mentioned that he saw Alec. Alec was in the transport division at this time, so that meant it was more like logistics, moving stuff up and around, and so that was probably safer than being a front line. Although Alec later on became a machine gunner, and so he wasn't long for that very safe thing. He says he sprained an ankle. Again, I'm not exactly sure when this letter is from. If he sprained the ankle, if it was at that first battle of Neuve or the Battle of Festubert, or if he just sprained it at some other time or not. So we don't know much about that either way. So sometime after that letter is written and before the next one, Jim gets shot in the eye. And fortunately, I guess it wasn't straight through his brain, but there you can see him with an eye patch on. And here he is, he's recovering in Ireland. They send you to a convalescent unit for recovery, and this was in Dublin, Ireland. But the wound was sufficiently bad, and I think his remaining eye wasn't that good. So he was discharged from the army, and that was the end of his war anyway. So if you call it lucky getting shot in the eye, I guess that's what you call it. And here's another picture, and there's Jim again on the left of the photo as we look at it, and you can see here his eye is gone. He gets fitted for a glass eye at some point after this, but there he is, I guess, well on the mend at that point, anyways. So here's another letter from Jack from the French front in 1915. This is a bit poignant because he is killed soon after this letter. So I'll read the letter to you. From Private J.C. Penny, number 11279, E Company, 6th Battalion, Gordon Highlanders, 7th Division, 20 Brigade, British Expeditionary Force, France. Dear Father and Mother, just a few lines to let you know I am still in the land of the living and getting on not so bad. I suppose you will know by this time that Jim is wounded. He got shot in the eye. I don't know if it is serious or not. I did not see him at all. It is just what I hear from the boys saying. But I hope he will get over it all right. If you hear anything about him, you might write and let me know if he gets over it all right. It will finish his fighting. For what I hear them saying, it was his left eye, and that was his good one. Well, Mother, I would like if you would send on some envelopes and writing paper, and some mealy Jims, and some sweets, for you know I always had a sweet tooth after sweets. I got Alec's parcel, but I have not seen him yet. You know he is working with the transport wagons, and it is only sometimes that I see him. And if I did not take them, they would likely kick around and get lost, and he would not see them at all. Well, I will stop now. I hope you are well. From Jack. As I say, particularly poignant because that was his last letter. The Battle of Loos is the next major engagement, and this is a big one. Compared with small-scale British efforts, this used 6 divisions, and it was a mighty offensive, so much so it was referred to at the time as the Big Push. It was in the papers and back home, and everybody knew of that. It was notably the first time gas was used by the British side. The Germans had used gas before. I guess this was in retaliation, but they would open up gas canisters when the wind was blowing favorably, and the gas would waft over onto the German side, and the British troops would put on their gas masks, and they'd walk behind the rolling gas and shoot people. So this is apparently a photograph while that was going on. It's believed to have been taken by a soldier of the of a London regiment unit. So this battle, it was taking place on ground not of their choosing, and before stocks of ammunition and heavy artillery were sufficient. And the opening battle was noteworthy for the first use of poison gas by the British Army, as I said. Here's the rest of it. Despite heavy casualties, there was considerable success on the first day in breaking into the deep enemy positions near Loos and Hulluch, but the reserves had been held too far from the battle front to be able to exploit the successes, and succeeding days bogged down into attritional warfare for minor gains. So it was believed that there was quite a bit of foul-ups in the British command and the coordination, and that cost a lot of lives as a result. All in all, this one battle, there were 61,000 British casualties, that's dead or wounded, from this one battle. And you can see the land the battle was fought on. This is it just afterwards, completely flat. That structure in the distance is some industrial kind of structure in Loos, but it was a completely barren landscape, and it must have been absolutely hellish with the soldiers in those trenches. And unfortunately, Jack dies in that battle. And near the end of it, October 12th, he dies in the Battle of Loos. He was buried in the Schock military cemetery, that not far away from those battlefields. And there you see in the top right, this is the initial grave marking. And they sent along to the family a little booklet, and that also explained the location of the grave. And later on, the family had a headstone placed there, a proper headstone with his name, J.C. Penny, on it. This was, the family received this. He whom this scroll commemorates was numbered among those who, at the call of king and country, left all that was dear to them, endured hardness, faced danger, and finally passed out of the sight of men by the path of duty and self-sacrifice, giving up their own lives that others might live in freedom. Let those who come after see to it that his name be not forgotten. Private John Penny of the Gordon Highlanders. So, poor Jack. So this is a little map of that, a contemporary map of that region, but I've placed on it where the key events took place. Again, this is Belgium here. This is the current border with Belgium. The Battle of Neuve Chapelle was here. Battle of Festubert was here, and the Battle of Loos was over here. And then Jack was buried in the military cemetery in Schock, where his tombstone remains to this day. So if you're ever in the neighborhood, you want to go and pay your respects. This was a postcard that Jim received from a friend. That's the daughter of the farmer he worked for while at the farm at Souris in Manitoba. And she says, "Dear Jim, do you think you know who these are? How are you? I am fine. Hope you are the same. When are you going back to the front? The dear boys in Winnipeg do not know what they are going into, do they? Well, Papa's going to write sometime. Mabel T. And then off on the side it says, I was going to send this, but I changed my mind, so shall send it now. So I'm not sure who wrote that part. I think it's the same handwriting, and I'm not sure why. And when she's referring to do you think you know who these are? I suppose she's referring to the horses. As I mentioned, Alec was first posted to transport, and later he became a machine gunner. Alex was wounded, but not seriously enough to be discharged. So after a period in a convalescent unit, he returns to the regiment and serves until 1919. So here's the picture of Alec over here, the guy on the left of the photo on the right. That's him recovering on light convalescent duty in England after receiving the head wound. Jock is also injured in the war, and here's a picture of Jock in his convalescent unit. He's injured in the leg while guarding the Woolwich Arsenal in London, being a night watchman there. Now, the interesting thing about Alec, and here's some family lore about Alec, a bullet had entered his neck and his upper chest region and lodged too close to the backbone to be removed surgically. But the bullet caused no discomfort or problem by all accounts. But years later in Canada, he had a coughing spell one night while sitting in his living room at Keewatin Avenue, and the bullet was coughed out. Well, that's the family lore. Numerous people in my family have repeated that, and my dad wrote it down as well as a little family anecdote. I guess I'll let you judge for yourself if it's true or not. It seems unlikely that would happen, but who knows? Who knows? Maybe that's the way it works. So Alec, as I say, served out the war, and we have some Christmas cards and New Year's cards that they sent back from France. One from 1917 to my dear mother, another one from 1918, and you can see it's signed down here, Alec to mother. There's a cute little poem about men frae the Tweed, up to old John O'Groats, brought up on porch and haggis and oats. I guess that's clever. And here's the one from the next year, I think this is New Year's 1919, so at the end of 1918. And this is the various battles that the Gordon Highlanders fought in 1915, 16, 17, 18, and now it's 1919. You can see in 1915 the Battle of Neuve, Chapelle, then Festubert, and then Battle of Givenchy, and then Loos, which is where Jack lost his life. And again, this one is signed from Alex to mother. So there's a war memorial in Inverurie. So if you ever go visit Inverurie, you may want to pass by the war memorial there. I've got some close-ups. In proud and grateful memory of the men of Inverurie district who gave their lives in the Great War, 1914 to 1918. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. And it's got a list of the soldiers from the region on the back, those amongst the Gordons, and over here, listed in the privates, is this one here, J.C. Penny, John Clark Penny, Jr. And I think we've seen these photos before, but good time to bring them back. This is Uncle Jim. This is Jim after the war in Inverurie. He's working as a postman. You can see his eye is injured. His left eye is injured. He doesn't yet have his glass eye at this point. And here is also just prior to immigrating to Canada. So again, sometime after the war in 1920 or so, Alec was discharged around 1919. That's Alec and that's Annie at the time as well. So that's what they looked like after the war. So there you have it, the story of the pennies during the First World War. And recall, these are the brothers of Alan Penny, who's my grandfather, the son of Jock, who was Alan Penny's dad, and the terrible loss and the terrible disruption of lives that happened during that war. So I think that calls for a toast, I'd say, to the gallantry of the boys who fought in the First World War. So, cheers. So next time I'll be back for the immigration to Canada and the early years in Canada. And we start getting a lot more family photos at that point. So that should be interesting, and stay tuned for that.